Good morning, everybody. Hey, before we get into the text real quick, just a heads up, some of you received an email from Jason Fritz, but it wasn't the real Jason Fritz this week. I would never ask you for iTunes gift cards. I would never ask you to mow my grass. I wouldn't ask you to do anything goofy like that. I personally am still waiting for that $1 billion to appear in my bank account from that Nigerian prince. So, unfortunately, there's just a lot of nefarious people out there, and as the church grows and as our influence becomes more and more, we become bigger targets. Oh, and by the way, I'm not surprised because this week we're in Mark chapter 5, very unique chapter in the life of Jesus because there are demons and there is an exorcism. So one of my mentors used to say, and I believe he's right, used to say that perhaps the most misbelieved verse in the Bible we find in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12. It says this, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood." Really? I mean, isn't my problem with you? "We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness." By the way, there's a lot of people, Christian and non-Christian, that would describe the world as a dark place. The Bible has always described it that way. Notice, there are authorities, there are powers, there are rulers. This is heavily organized, and they're spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. If I've said it before, if you and I could put on these spiritual lenses, we'd probably have the hell scared out of us. There is this reality to our existence that is, quite frankly, dismissed and denied by modern people. Modern people think it's irrational and illogical to believe that there is a spiritual force that is evil. But consider this. Still, overwhelmingly, the majority of Americans believe in a personal, supernatural being that is good. So, if there is a personal, supernatural, good being, why couldn't there be a bad one? Right? Why couldn't there be a bad one? And so, when we look at the Bible, what we find is that it's incredibly balanced. It tells us that there is this supernatural realm, but there's also a natural realm. Well, how do we tell the two apart? On one hand, you have those that dismiss it completely, right? These are people that are rational, they're naturalists. Then you have those who kind of function like we're still in the Dark Ages, a time of superstition where there's like a demon behind every rock. Where do you find the balance in that? Well, you find it in the Bible, and I'll actually give you a passage that speaks to it from Matthew chapter 4. So this is the healing ministry of Jesus. Jesus' popularity is beginning to increase, and rightly so, because there's never been anybody like him. He's going around and he's healing blind people, he's restoring the sick, he's performing all these miracles, and so his popularity is spreading. His fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him different categories of people. All those who are sick, which include those afflicted with various diseases and pains, seems to be a natural cause. Those oppressed by demons, that would be supernatural. Those having seizures, some are paralyzed, and he heals them all. So there is in this verse a distinction between the supernatural and natural, people that are being brought to Jesus. Some infirmities are a result of natural things, right? The natural order that God has put into the world, and some things are a result of supernatural. Now, I'm going to say something that's going to help you understand and give context to the world as you live in it, all right, as we live in it. Because there's a reason why the world is so messed up. There's a reason why there's so much chaos in the world today. And it's because the natural and the supernatural play off of each other. What? Yeah, the natural and the supernatural actually play off of each other. See, the Bible tells us in Romans 3:23 that we're all sinners. And we all fall short of God's standard of perfection. We're all sinners. In other words, we all have this overwhelming tendency to establish ourselves as God and to disregard what our Creator has to say about what is right and wrong, about how to live our lives. It's just within us. It's like I've said last month. I said, look, nobody has to teach a toddler how to lie. As a parent, we spend our adult lives, parenting lives, trying to instill within our kids the value of truth-telling. Nobody has to teach a kid how to lie. It just comes natural. The Bible says that we're all sinners. At the same time, it does speak of the spiritual reality in the supernatural realm, powers of darkness. And these two things do play off of each other. And because they play off of each other, that's why we see so much of what is wrong with the world today. I'll give you a verse that describes it. So in 1 Timothy chapter 3, Paul, the Apostle Paul, is very concerned about the health of the church. And so when it comes to the selection of leaders, you've got to have some pretty high standards. You have to have men who are above reproach. And then he also adds this. He must not be a recent convert. Why? Because if he's a new believer and he gets selected for the position of leading God's people, he could become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil, right? So you've seen this happen before. Someone gets handed something to them and they're too young and all of a sudden they start thinking, I'm the man. And there are people in church leadership who are more enamored with the title than the actual function, because the function of an elder or pastor is this: you're a servant. You're an extreme servant, okay? Forget about the title. Let's just focus on the function. But if you get a new convert, he might become arrogant and puffed up and say, oh, look at the title I have. I'm a leader around here. But interestingly, this is the same problem that the devil had: pride. So what he's saying is if you're proud, then you're going to fall into the same trap that the devil fell into, because the devil loves to operate on that playground. And he loves it when you do it as well. Because your pride and my pride will be a tool in the hands of evil to accomplish messed up stuff. People say, oh man, I'm just so thankful I've never been demon-possessed. Okay. How about this? Powers of darkness are very subtle. And it might be worse for you to be influenced by them than possessed by them. Because if you're influenced by them, it's more socially acceptable. It's your pride coming out. And it's the same thing that was in Satan, as we'll see in a second, coming out. And so this is their playground. So the powers of darkness will play off of what is the power of nature within you. And so this is why we see so many messed up things in the world today. So you've heard it said that pride is the original sin. That doesn't refer to Adam and Eve, by the way. That actually does refer to Satan. I'll read it to you from Isaiah chapter 14. Listen to the language. It says, how you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. This is a title of beauty, and that's how the Bible describes Satan. He even disguises himself as an angel of light, something beautiful. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low, which tells you that there is a spiritual demonic force behind governments that perpetuate poverty, social injustice. Because you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the Mount Assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. That's pride. It's Satan saying, I should have that throne, God. I should have that throne. So the created thing doesn't tell the creator how it goes. So he's removed from God's presence. And then the Bible opens up with Genesis chapter 1. And what's he doing? He's messing with people. He is using what is inside Adam and Eve, their nature, their sin, and bringing it out. C.S. Lewis puts it well. There are two equal and opposite errors into which our race, the human race, can fall about the devils. Two different ways you can think about it. One is to disbelieve in their existence, and that's, again, where many modern people are today. It's irrational. The other is to believe and to feel an excessive and unhealthy interest in them. These are the people that are more superstitious, that see a demon behind every rock. So they, that is, the powers of darkness, they're equally pleased with both views, because both views are wrong. They will hail a materialist or a magician with the same delight. The materialist denying that there is the supernatural, that's great. They'll love that because if they can go unnoticed, then they're unimpeded. You don't even know they're at work. You don't even know you have an enemy. Or the person that does see a demon behind every rock and then lives their lives in constant fear of everything, they're cool with that too because fear will paralyze you. Either way, you're a slave of a puppet. So there's a balanced and informed approach when it comes to us in the Bible. And nowhere, in my opinion, is the confrontation between the powers of heaven and the powers of hell more clearly understood than in Mark chapter 5. So with this understanding, let's go ahead and read. And by the way, as we read this, remember, we're in a series that talks about and helps us understand God's heart for those who are far from him. And what you're going to see in this text is someone society looks at and says, unclean, dirty, stay away. How could God reach someone like that? Chapter 5, verse 1. So they, that's Jesus and the disciples, came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. Remember that phrase, I'm going to come back to it. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For Jesus was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So Jesus gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. Now the herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country. They got to tell this story of what happened, and people came to see what it was that happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs, and they began to beg, "Jesus, can you leave? This is freaking us out. Go away from us. Depart from our region." So Jesus was getting into the boat, and the man who had been possessed with demons begged Jesus that he might be with him. And Jesus said, "No. No. Instead, go. Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And the man went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. So, in order to understand what's happening, we need to back up 2 chapters to Mark chapter 3. And it's in chapter 3 that we see Jesus' popularity really beginning to increase. He's healing. He's doing things that have never been done before. The crowds are beginning to attract, and the religious leaders are beginning to take notice. These are the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees. They're the religious elite. They believed it went from God to them to everybody else, and they held sway. Very powerful group of people. And they don't like Jesus. Because his popularity is gaining, he's attracting people away from them, and they decide, we got to do something about this guy. The text literally says they sought to destroy him. Ultimately, they will be the ones who deliver him up to be crucified, but they got to figure it out. Like, what's the plan here? How are we going to get rid of this guy before he gets too popular? Now, they see him healing. They see him performing supernatural things, so they can't deny that. But what happens is Jesus encounters a man with a hand, and it's deformed. The text uses the word withered. It's got a withered hand. That's tough because, you use your hands to make a living. It's going to affect your income and how you feed yourself and your family. So he's got this withered hand. And the text tells us that Jesus heals him on the Sabbath. Now you say, what's the Sabbath? According to the Old Testament, God created the Sabbath as a day of rest where no work was to be done. And so the religious leaders defined what it meant to do no work. They defined what it meant to rest. And in doing so, they took God's laws to places where God never took them. And they put restrictions on things that God never intended to be restricted. They took things way beyond where God took them. And it made it heavy and burdensome for the people. Like, can I do this? Can I not do that? Well, what do the religious leaders say? And Jesus is like, I'm not for that. I'm not about that. Well, they determined that to heal someone on the Sabbath was a work and therefore a violation of God's law. We got him. Oh, we got him. We got him now. He's a lawbreaker. More so, because they can't deny his supernatural power, because they deem him a lawbreaker, they say, oh, your power doesn't come from God. It comes from Satan. Okay, that is a huge swing and a miss. When you attribute Jesus' power to Satan's power, that tells you just how far these guys are. But this is where they're at. In fact, in Matthew chapter 12, he records exactly what they're saying, and he records Jesus' response. But when the Pharisees heard it, that he had healed on the Sabbath, they said, hey, this fellow doth not cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of the devils. That's his power. Beelzebub was a pagan god that was satanic. And Jesus knew their thoughts. See, Jesus knows what's going on. He knows what they're thinking. So he says to them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. You have kingdoms like a civil war. You have kingdom fighting against kingdom within that kingdom's not going to last. It's going to be torn apart. Every city or house divided against itself is not going to stand. So, if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself, then how is his kingdom going to stand? And if by Beelzebub, as you say, cast out devils, by whom do your children cast them out? So, if the people, the nation of Israel, your own kids, cast out demons in the name of God, but I don't, well, check it out. They're going to be your judges because I cast out devils by the Spirit of God. And that's how you know that the kingdom of God is come unto you. So here's what's happening. The reason why Mark records this event because of what in chapter 5 is because of what happens in chapter 3. In chapter 3, they say, oh no, he's not from God. He's from Satan. So Mark says, okay, well, let me tell you a little something about Jesus. There was this time that he confronted a legion. As far as I can tell, the word legion in this day represented between 4,000 and 6,000. This one guy has at least 4,000 demons in him. Mark says, let me tell you about the time that Jesus confronted 4,000 demons. And with a statement come out of him. With just a few words. No struggle, no fight. Just a few words. He commanded his power over the powers of darkness. This is Mark's way of telling you Jesus is who he said he is. He is the Son of God. He is the Messiah. Not only does he command power over nature, but he commands power over what is supernatural. Now, before we get into the rest of the text, I want to take a moment and I want to bring something to you. In this demoniac, I see 6 characteristics that fit a pattern and a profile. That not only does it match with, obviously, what's in the text, but my own personal experience. When I see these 6 characteristics in the same person, that tells me there is demonic activity. Number 1, a severe personality change. The evidence for this is the before and the after. The text tells us before, he's coming, he's out of his mind, he's a wild man. He's like naked, he's bleeding, he's self-harming, he's cutting himself, he's shouting. And then afterwards, Mark is very careful to tell you, he's got his clothes back on because he realizes how things should be. And not only that, but Mark says he's sane. That is, he's in his right mind. the severe personality change. Without going into length or detail, several years ago I was an intern, and I encountered a woman. She's about 5'4", maybe 150 pounds, and she began to take on the personality of the demon. That is to say, her voice became masculine, very low, and she became extremely aggressive. And she would switch back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it's this severe personality change. It's as if, yeah, like I said, she took on the personality and the presence of this demon. Severe personality change. Number 2, antisocial behavior. Mark is careful to note a couple times that this guy lives in the tombs. He's sleeping there. So these were caves, places that were carved out of rocks, and tombs are where you put bodies after being embalmed. This is where the guy spends his time. He's hanging out with the dead and decaying. He's sleeping amongst rotting bodies. And he's not around people because he's severely violent. There's this antisocial behavior. It's not as if he's homeless and living on the streets. He's actually, so what would happen is they would embalm a body, lay it in the tomb that they'd carved out of a rock, and then after the body had decayed enough to where there were just bones, they would go back in and they would collect the bones and put the bones in an ossuary. So again, this guy is living amongst dead, decaying bodies. Thirdly, and interestingly, he has spiritual insight. So, in other words, when he comes to Jesus, notice what he says, "Have you come to torment us before the time?" Which also tells me they may be more aware of God's eternal plan than most people on earth, maybe more than Christians. You've come to torment us before the time? What time is he talking about? Well, if you read the book of Revelation, you realize that there is an ultimate destruction upon evil, right? And it's almost as if they say, okay, we know about that time. Are you coming to destroy us earlier than the time? So my parents were missionaries in Africa, and I do believe that the powers of darkness manifest themselves in ways that cultures, they understand the culture very well. So when my parents were missionaries in Africa, there was a man who walked into a church service, and he was wild-eyed, and he was crazy, and he was half naked, and he began confessing the hidden and unknown sins of people in the congregation in front of the congregation. So there was this spiritual insight. Number 4, superhuman strength. No one could bind him. He broke the chains. Number 5, he was in constant torment, and this is what caused him to act inhuman or like an animal. Number 6, he was destructive, cutting himself. So again, when I see these 6 characteristics in one person, it tells me that there is something supernatural, evil, going on. All right, now remember, the disciples are with Jesus as they encounter this man. Do you know what happens just before this? You know, because the text says they're in a boat and they get to the shore, right? And then this man comes out to meet immediately. The word is immediately. But do you know what happens? You know what happened? It's that story where they're in the boat on the sea and there's a storm. And the men are like, oh, we're going to die. We're going to die. And Jesus shows up, right? He's like, no, it's all good. It's all good. And he commands nature. See, that's Mark's way of, Jesus did a lot of things, right? When John writes his gospel, he said Jesus did so many things, there wouldn't be a book in the world big enough to record them all. So why do you think the gospel writers record these specific events? Because previously what he's saying is Jesus was just calm down, nature, calm down. And the storm subsides. So that's Mark telling you, Mark chapter 1, verse 1, he's saying, know this, Jesus is the Messiah. He's the Son of God. Now, I'm going to take the rest of my account, and I'm going to prove it to you. So just before this event, you have Jesus in the boat calming the storm, and that's Mark saying, oh, this is the man that controls nature. Yeah, why? Because he's the Messiah. He's the Son of God. See, these are all evidences. So there's this massive storm. The guys think they're going to die, and they're like, oh, all right, well, man, we made it through that. Oh, we're alive. Are you good? Yeah, I'm good. Wow, that was so crazy. All right, we're on the shore. And they step off the boat, and all of a sudden, there's this wild, naked man coming at them, and they're like, are you serious? Are you serious? You know, I don't know exactly what happened, but if I'm there, I'm looking for driftwood or something. I'm like, all right, boys, come on, you know, it's on. But this demoniac has no interest in the disciples. He's interested in one man, and that is Jesus. And you know what the text says? The text says, have you come to torment us, Son of God? And the text says that this several thousand demons in one moment, in this man, fall down before Jesus. That word fall down, that little phrase, literally means worship. Oh! The demons worship Jesus. The demons worship Jesus. And Jesus just says, come out. What's your name? 1,000? Come out. It reminds me of what is, in my opinion, the most anticlimactic verse in the Bible, Revelation chapter 20, where there's this epic battle between Satan and God. Actually, no. You expect it to be this epic battle. You expect it to be like, the battle of all battles, man. I mean, just like, and the text literally just says, and Satan was bound and cast into the lake of fire. Done. That's it. There's no contest. It's not even close. This is the power that Jesus said. By the way, back in the day, we have ancient literature, especially from Egyptian society, that they spell out the way in which you drive out an evil spirit or what they thought were evil spirits. And they always did so by appealing to a higher spirit, a higher force. If you want to drive out a lower spiritual form of evil, then you have to appeal to a higher form of good. And so what happens here is that's exactly what the demons do. They literally say, I appeal to God, as if they're going to go above Jesus' head. I appeal to God, a higher power than you. Don't torture us. And Jesus is like, no, that's not how we play this. Come out. Come out. And he allows them to go into the pigs. So we should probably ask the question, what's up with the pigs? I have no idea. I have no clue. But I can tell you how a first century reader would understand this. 2,000 pigs represented an incredible amount of money. I told you last week that eating meat was a luxury. So if you have 2,000 pigs, if you owned 2,000 pigs, you were of elite wealth. And so 2,000 pigs, demon-possessed, jump off a cliff into the sea and drown. A first century reader is going, wow, what a waste of money. What a waste of money. What do we learn from this? I don't know exactly, other than the world's sense of value and wealth, Jesus cares nothing for. He doesn't care about it. The Bible says that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. It's all his to do with as he wants. Oh, and by the way, it makes for a great story because what happens? People start talking. And oh, by the way, it's hard to deny and dismiss that this happened when you've got 2,000 pigs floating around in the sea. More to the point, Mark is showing that there is evil, it is incredibly destructive, and Jesus has power over that evil. 1 John 3:8, whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason why the Son of God, that's a reference to Jesus, appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. So that's why Mark writes and he says, hey, Jesus is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. Mark chapter 1, verse 1, that's his opening statement. Then throughout the rest of the book, he says, let me prove it to you. Let me prove it to you. Oh, let me tell you about the time that Jesus confronted 4,000 demons and with just a few words overpowered them. Jesus is who he said he was. Now, there's something else to note here. Mark specifically mentions in verse 1 that all this took place in the area of the Gerasenes. Now, the Gessarenes represented the heart of Gentile territory, non-Jewish territory. And Jews back in the day did not step foot in Gentile territory. Now, remember, Jesus would have the appearance and presence of a rabbi. The last thing you would ever see a rabbi, a respectable rabbi, do is step foot onto Gentile territory. Far less going to the heart of it. Gessarenes? And Jesus is like, that's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. Hey, the people that you see as dirty outcasts, I see they need help. And there's someone there that needs my help. And so that's where we're going. Afterward, the man is clothed. He's in his right mind. But beforehand, Mark describes him as naked, bleeding, and crying out. You know, if you read the end of Mark's account of the life of Jesus, you know how he describes Jesus on the cross? He's naked, he's bleeding, and he's crying out. Jesus is dealing with evil again on the cross, but he's doing it once and for all. And he's not going to send evil into pigs, and evil is not even going to be represented with some sacrificial lamb, not anymore. Jesus says, I'm going to go ahead and take all evil, all the wrongs that you've done, all the wrongs that I've done, and I'm going to go ahead and bear it on myself. And I'm going to hang naked, and I'm going to bleed, and I'm going to cry out. And they say, Jesus, we're spooked by you. Get out. Go away. This is kind of weird. You know, we don't want this bad mojo coming into our pigs again, right? Get out. But the guy who'd been healed goes to Jesus and he says, I got to go with you, man. Hey, let me get in a boat. Let me go with you guys. And Jesus says, no. No. No, because I've got something else for you. Go. Do you know how often Jesus says go? You should do a study just on the amount of times Jesus looks at people and he says, go. Now, this is super profound, because here's what Jesus is saying. You know what's better than being in my physical presence, Jesus says? You know what's better than that? Go be in the physical presence of those who don't know me and tell them your story. Tell them about how you've experienced my love, my mercy, my grace. Nah. It's better that you go to your friends. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you, how he has had mercy on you. And that's what the man does. And to the Decapolis, city center, and everyone marveled. There would be no everyone marveled if the guy didn't go. So you know where we've been at for the last few weeks. It's our desire to have the heart of God for all people. So who's that person in your life that you look at and you say, God could never reach that person? No way, way too far gone. Okay, this story basically shatters that. And it lets you know that Jesus is for everyone. And it lets you know that Jesus wants to use you to tell your story to reach those people. So Jesus, in his brilliance, he said, people are going to have a tendency to forget all that I've done for them. You can't impart what you don't know. You also can't impart what really isn't in your heart, right? There's a heart motivation that moves us out of the boat and into the public arena, engaged in culture. It's one of our core values. We are a force, people, not a fortress. So we take what we have here in the scriptures and we take it outside these walls and we represent Jesus. And so before Jesus died, he said, here's the thing I want you to remember about me. I want you to remember my death, my burial, and my resurrection, because that's what everything hinges upon. So that's what we're going to do now as we conclude our time together. If you've never participated in this time with us, this is for believers, people who have placed their faith and trust in Jesus Christ. If you haven't done that and you want to, all you do is you simply say, God, I recognize that I'm, if you're ready for it, a sinner. A sinner is someone who, like I said, essentially, like me at one point, adopts the heart of Satan in pride, says, I don't need it. But you do need it. You need forgiveness. You need a way to deal with all of the shame and all of the guilt, and that's why Jesus died. You simply tell God, that's what I need. It's as simple as that. This is for those who believe in Jesus Christ. As the men and women come forward and serve you the elements, there's 2 cups stacked on top of each other. Grab them both, and then when we've all been served, I'll come up and lead us.